It's spring. You wouldn't think it. There was a time in Warsaw during the spring where we would go through the parks and look at all the flowers, look at the trees coming into leaf, think summer is around the corner after the long, grim, grey winter. Well, it's grey again today, but they aren't clouds. That's ashes, it's smoke. That is the ruin of the ghetto. That smell you can taste is the burning of the Jewish quarter. The Nazis have decided to finish the job they began in 1940. And thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more have gone from this desolate, cramped place to somewhere far, far worse. And they went like cattle, like sheep to the slaughter. But this time it's been different. This time, a few of us, a few hundred, no more, have fought back. Yes, they'll wipe us out. Yes, they'll destroy us. Yes, they'll sweep this place from the face of the earth and pretend it never happened. But there are some who will remember. Not our friends in Poland, they don't want to help us. But we, the Jews of the ghetto, for the first time, we fought back.
I am by training a lawyer. Dry as dust, you say. And perhaps you're right. But we lawyers have our uses. Dealing with the Polish question is a case in point. Once we'd crushed resistance and the army had all their pretty parades and flag waving, then it was down to the real business. Part of the rump of Poland we annexed directly into the Reich. Another we handed over to our Soviet allies, the scum of the earth, as Hitler Führer himself described them. Quite right. But for the moment we shook hands and pretended they were somewhere near human. Their time would come. As for the Poles, well, that was down to me. I was appointed to administer the central province or general government, which, if everyone else had their way, would become the dumping ground for every useless Jew and Pole. We'll see about that, I decided. Once we've shown these Poles their position in the new order, once we've done away with their leaders, their priests, teachers and intelligentsia, they'd soon come to know their place. And then we'd deal with the Jews, of course.
It was on the 1st of September, another lovely sunny day, when the Germans invaded Poland, crossed the border. They in the west, their Russian friends, former enemies, in the east. Hitler and Stalin shaking hands over the corpse of Poland. Couldn't fight them both, of course. We've seen the Russians off in 1920. Germans are a different league. They destroyed our planes on the ground. Their tanks were better, their guns were better, their tactics were better. It was over in 6 weeks. Warsaw was bombed. Poland was crushed. There were 3 million of us, just Jews, living in Poland at the time. Pushed there, our families pushed there, last century by the Tsars. Didn't suit the Germans to have us living in our small village, our shetels. They were burnt. We were moved, no option, by trucks or forced marched. Many died. Those who fell by the wayside were shot. We were crammed into areas, into the Jewish quarters of all the big cities, Lodz and Warsaw. Warsaw particularly. Tens of thousands were crammed into tenements that had been occupied by a few hundred before. And we were walled in with tombstones. The Germans were going to harvest us, use us as a resource, and then get rid of us when they were finished. We had our own councillor, Judenrat, who were responsible under the Nazis for allocating labour. And they played along. You could call them collaborators, but they didn't understand. They didn't understand what the Nazis actually had in store for us. Nobody could believe they intended to kill all the Jews of Poland. Indeed, they intended to kill all the Jews of Europe. But they did. And very soon we'd find out.
Our street, like many others consisted of a few shops, including stationers and tailors and laundry. However, our street was more a lane really, with up to 40 to 50 families living in houses that were sometimes 7 stories high. Sometimes in the winter the snow would be kind of piled so high that the lane became even more kind of cramped, dark and dirty with the snow itself. The pale shaft of grey light that would kind of come through seemed even darker in those times. In the summer though, we would often hear the sounds and the smells of fruit and baked bread as the traders drove by. Our street was like many hundreds of thousands in kind of Warsaw itself. It consisted of a small box in a kind of courtyard with a staircase at either end of it. Our home was used for a variety of purposes, including being used to house travellers on their way to Palestine for a new life. It consisted mainly of 2 rooms, a kitchen and a bathroom, which was hidden by slats where all manner of junk and laundry could be kind of stored. This is how we Jews lived. For us, this felt like home in our community. We spoke mainly Yiddish and we felt safe here. Of course, all of that was about to change.
When I'm lecturing to students at the University of Berlin and other seats of Aryan learning, I'm always careful to describe the position here in the ghetto in detail and to put into proper perspective the situation of the Jews in Poland. You see, not every Jew is a parasite. There are some who really work. Believe me, I've seen this myself. Surprisingly, there are Jews who come into a different category. It's hard to believe, I know. But there are some who really work and are employed in factories as skilled artisans, workers, transport workers, building workers, and skilled shoemakers, tailors, and others. With the help of these artisans, Jewish workshops were set up, and in exchange for food and other basic necessities, their production went far towards lightening the load of German industry. None of this, of course, implies we shall deviate from pursuing the final solution to the Jewish problem. It has already been agreed that within the general government area we will reduce the number of Jews by 1.2 million through starvation. If the Jews do not actually die of starvation, then other measures will have to be enacted. And the appropriate steps taken. Still, it's not as easy as Himmler would wish it. We simply cannot deal with all the Jews at once, given that so many of them are skilled mechanics and skilled artisans working in the munitions and armaments sector. You simply can't replace all these people overnight. There aren't sufficient trained replacements amongst the Poles. Himmler forgets we've got a water fight and the SS is always clamouring for fresh supplies. It's the SS who are keen, for all their ideological reasons, to crack on with doing away with the Jews. But I've got the generals on my back, wanting more of everything all the time, and they don't care about the Jewish question at all.
So they kept us, walled in like rats in their trap. Thousands crammed into tiny insanitary tenements. There was hunger, despair, disease. Germans used us like slaves. Worked us till we could work no more, either shot us in the streets or left us to die. Those who had some money, those who had jewellery or who had gold, who had things they could trade, could survive. The resistance, the Poles beyond the walls, well, they weren't interested in helping us. They'd sell us stuff, but we got no support, no supply from them. It seemed like a big joke to them. It changed again. First day of summer, in another of those lovely early summer days in 1941, when Hitler threw his legions east. He turned on his old ally Stalin and pushed 3 million German soldiers with their thousands of tanks and thousands of planes into Russia. And that changed everything. In White Russia, Belarus, there were many more million Jews. More Jews than the Germans could cope with. Now sometime, we don't know when, Hitler would have mentioned to one of his creatures that it was time for a final solution to the Jewish problem. Now he didn't get it. We didn't understand that that final solution meant our annihilation. Those who were moved east were told they were going east for resettlement. One of history's ironies. Camps began to appear. Places like Belzec, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek. People who went there never came back. We heard stories, of course. Terrible stories about car exhausts being used to fill rooms with noxious fumes to kill people. People being shot like dogs in the street. But we didn't think it was necessarily real. We didn't want to think. We had our Jewish council who fell over themselves to collaborate. We even had Jewish police to enforce the Nazis' rules. 1941, it started to go wrong though. We knew the Germans were strong, but they didn't get to Moscow. And Russia didn't fall. Didn't help us, of course. And then we began to hear, early in 42, about a new camp. A new camp in a Polish town east of us, a place called Auschwitz. They called the place Auschwitz. And in 1942, in that year, they began to clear the ghetto. People were moved out into the Umschlagplatz, the great square, and from then they filed onto trails, filed like cattle, like the good victims that they were. No problem, no bother for the Germans. All the Jewish police were happy to collaborate, saving their own necks, so they thought. And the deportations continued. By January 1943, the place was emptying. Most of the ones they took to begin with were the old, the sick, the lame, the poor, those who had no family, no network to support them. But once they were gone, they began to come for everyone else. Maybe it was then, some of us, the young people, formed our own organization, ZOB, a resistance organization. We didn't know how we were going to resist, but we would resist. We would not just go like cattle, lamely to the slaughter. Somehow, we'd fight back.
The permits no longer have any currency. Sometimes they let the permit holders go. Sometimes they'll take us anywhere. If the Germans fill in their quotas, they're a bit more relaxed. But if they're behind, kicks, blows, butt of a rifle, bullet for those that try to escape. Sometimes they even put notices up in this damned square, offering extra bread and jam to those that'll appear. Some of us are so desperate that they'll accept the bribe. They'll come willingly. They prefer a bit of bread and jam to the possibility of living.
On the 17th of January, Polish Warsaw passed through a horrible day. The unrests were of unheard of proportions. These happened on the streets, in the municipal lines, on the trams, on the intercity links, in the railways, in the churches. It is not surprising that since the railway has been empty, and the city, there's not a soul in the streets and the trams are bare. The whole city is just quiet. But rumour has it that the Germans are not relenting. They are not reducing their efforts. The Gestapo are on the move to the ghettos, and the uprooting has begun again. On the 18th of January at 6 o'clock, In the morning, some of the streets in which the forced labourers of the workshops and the factories still lived, it was filled with horrible shouting, vile shouting, and this bursts of gunfire and sounds of trucks and motorcycles. Like wild beasts, the Germans just thrust their ways into the courtyards. They pulled people around, they mauled anyone who didn't move quick enough to obey their orders to go into the streets and form lines to the Umschlagblasts.
The day has passed, the 5th of the expulsion. On the first day, the hungry, the refugees and the beggars went. Those more solid inhabitants didn't feel the act of the expulsion at first. It was mainly those without homes, food or the required permits. The Germans imposed a quota of thousands to appear at the Umschlagplatz. The Jewish police emptied the refugee stations, dragged the sick and the dying from the streets. The Germans were very angry. It took a long time to meet the quotas. They arrested anybody, whoever they could. We didn't care about our neighbours, we just thought of saving ourselves.
At 6 in the morning, a line of soldiers entered the ghetto. Hart moved off down Wolinska Street, the rest stayed put. About an hour later, a contingent of Jewish police officers arrived, and the whole lot of them lined up on either side of the street and advanced towards us. We weren't sure whether to attack, so we waited until the Germans followed on. When the centre of the line was below me, I leaned over the balcony and I hurled my grenades. These rained down on the Germans from all directions. The noise was terrific from the grenades bursting. We could hear loud shots and the rattle of German Schmeisers. We had them pinned. Wherever they tried to scuttle, we barred doors. Death was chasing them. We could hear the screams and astonished cries. Die Juden haben Waffen! Die Juden haben Waffen! Jews have arms. We fought for around half an hour. Then they withdrew and fell back, streets littered with their dead and wounded. I've never felt anything like this. They were actually running. The oppressors, running and screaming and falling beneath our bombs and bullets. It felt good.
Let us see, before the throat stifles the last cries of woe, their arrogant hands, their whip-holding fists. Tense our fear of man, from Niska, Miller and Maranau. Like a bouquet of blood flowers, our heart cries from the gun barrels. This is our spring, our counterattack.
The bunker in Miwa 18. It wasn't one the fighters had prepared for themselves. It was a good 3 blocks long, and it was underneath a set of ruins. It had been used by the criminals and the smugglers in the Jewish ghetto. It had a long corridor down the middle. It had electricity, running water, showers. It even had a reading and a recreation room. The leader, Samuel Asher they called him, he acted like he was king of the underground.
They had fresh bread and liquor from the Polish side, but we soon swelled the population from a few dozen criminals to hundreds of refugees and fighters. The gangsters were of great help to us, of course. They knew every inch of the space and could roam around at night undetected. They helped us spy on German positions. Even when the streets were full of flames and smoke, thieves could slither and slide around the alleyways and tunnels like cats.
At the outset, these bandits reacted more violently than expected. Molotov cocktails were thrown and one of our tanks was damaged. We sustained some casualties and our forces were forced to retreat. I realised my predecessor had completely failed to assess the threat properly and immediately relieved him of his command, assuming direct responsibility myself. We lost 6 SS and as many Ukrainian auxiliaries in this fiasco. I realised we had to set about the job properly and immediately directed the SS to take care of the ghetto. Once I'd got rid of that oaf von Salmon, we set about the job properly. We drove the bandits from their roofs and upper levels down into their cellars and complexes. Now I'll admit, we didn't realise how well prepared these bunker complexes were, nor how extensive. We had to use explosives and gas to winkle the Jews out. After a while, my men were referring to the Jewish fighters as the enemy, as if they were recognised combatants. They had relatively few firearms, mainly antiquated pistols. Apparently, Himmler had promised the Führer the utter destruction of the ghetto as a present for Hitler's 54th birthday. Well, who am I to argue? Still, to my report, some 56,065 Jews were caught during the action. We killed 7,000 on the spot and a further 6,929 sent straight to Treblinka. So apart from those we caught, we killed a total of 13,929. We recovered 7 Polish, 1 Russian rifle, 59 assorted revolvers, a quantity of grenades and improvised explosive devices. The ghetto, apart from a few structures, was completely destroyed, though I anticipate we'll recover many tons of salvaged bricks, scrap iron, etc. So the job might yet pay for itself. Who would have thought the Jews would finally have learned how to fight? And not just the men, but the women too. It's a most unsatisfactory business and very unsettling. Some of us have to try and deal with the Jews and the Poles to extract the maximum labour from them. Dealing with subhumans can be as tricky as dealing with real people. This clearing of the ghetto has been trying. So very trying, in fact. The SS will tell you this ethnic purification has had a calming effect. I'm not convinced. The battle has apparently cost us some 15 dead and nearly 90 wounded. We accounted for over 70,000 Jews. But the plain fact is, many escaped. Some into the woods to join the other terrorists, and some into the Polish sectors of Warsaw, where, on a continual basis, they keep attacking our forces.